it's the same mode of thinking of rulers who think that they are the masters of the country, not the servants of its populations.
Mm-hmm.
It stems from the Rassemblement Démocratique Africain, which was created in 1946 in Bamako, Mali, and which was heavily influenced by the French Communist Party,
Mm-hmm.
which was at that time the premier political party in France. After the Second World War, they had contributed so much to defeating Hitler and Nazism that they became popular and were the first political party ahead of any other right-wing or centrist party in France.
Mm.
So they were members of the government. And when the time came and when Africans told France and England, listen, we shed blood to free you from Hitler. Now we want our freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Loosen the chains of bondage, of colonial bondage, set us free. We want to be free.
Mm-hmm.
That triggered the process of creating political parties in Africa, which were prohibited in French West Africa or French Equatorial Africa.
Mm-hmm.
It was legally prohibited to create a political party if you were a black person in Africa, in your own homeland. But the Second World War changed everything. The elite African people saw that Europe was not so powerful as it claimed to be. So they started asking for autonomy first and then independence. That's when the communists stepped in with they were eager to help, quote unquote, but it was self-serving kind of help or assistance.
Mm-hmm.
And in the process, they molded somehow the Rassemblement Démocratique Africain, which was spearheaded by Félix Houphouët-Boigny of Côte d'Ivoire. And that movement retained two things from the model that the communists proposed. One of them was the somewhat hierarchical top-down approach to politics. What the elite decides is what goes.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other was the intolerance toward intellectuals, scholars.
Mm-hmm.
If you recall, in Côte d'Ivoire, Amadou Kourouma, who died, I think, in 2006, or I don't recall, I'll check later, was one of the main writers of the 20th century. But he was very critical of Houphouët-Boigny, of all the post-colonial elite.
And what was he critical of?
Everything. He wrote two books that are really classic books about post-colonial Africa. The first one was The Sons of Independence, Sun, S-U-N-S, meaning the searing heat of independence. The second was When the Wild Beasts Vote. And in both of them, he was very satirical, first of all, and very sharp in his writing. He blended the syntax of France with proverbs from African languages, particularly his native Maninka language. And he spent 10 years submitting his the first draft, the first manuscript of his of the Sons of Independence. The French publishers would not publish it, so he went to Canada. That's where he was published first and became a bestseller. Now it is a classic in African literature. So, but a mind like him had to flee Côte d'Ivoire and become a refugee in France, where he died. So that's a case in point in terms of intolerance, of dictatorship, and that's mind-controlling approach to the exercise of political power in Africa. It's a very Stalin type of regime, but it spared no one who was perceived as an adversary. But the comparison with Russia is almost just elementary, because Russia managed to build an industrial society. They wiped out illiteracy in all languages, not simply in Russian, but in the republics, the different Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, and others. So they were more somewhat nationalistic and more, they adhered to their program. They executed the program. Guinea was all centered around one individual, one person, the personality cult of secretary.
So are you saying that the methods that were implemented in Russia themselves were successful, or I'm just trying to understand that aspect of things, because some people would contest and say, there was some cult of personality in Russia with Stalinism, as you were saying, and that hundreds of millions of people died specifically during the Second World War. There were purges, as you said. There was the gulags, the kulaks as well as famine because of lack of food. Do you think that? Are you saying that they implemented their main party objectives as opposed to what Guinean form of, I guess, whatever you want to call it, neo-Marxism or not Marxism in general, was unable to? Or could you expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, Guinea was an underdeveloped colony of France. It is still today an underdeveloped country. It has not moved forward, it has moved backward. Russia has collapsed in terms of the Soviet Union has collapsed, but it has an industrial base. It makes planes, makes refrigerator, cars. It has electricity.
So you're saying the economic foundation itself was executed far better, pardon the pun, far better than...
Right. In the midst of repression, Stalin managed to build an economic and industrial base that is still in place today, or has been more or less modernized.
Okay.
And remember also, they were able, thanks to their ingenuity, energy, and creativity, to resist and defeat Hitler. If they had been a weak kind of economy without enough industrial base capable of building tanks, airplanes, trains, and what have you, all the wherewithal needed to wage a war, then Hitler would have ruled Russia. But they reacted first to the invasion in the Barbarossa operation launched by Hitler against Russia, and then they managed to defeat him almost single-handedly, because they were not necessarily helped by the West. So that's the fundamental difference. And let's not even dwell on the war side. It's the cultural. They were really nationalistic in Russia, both at the pan-Russian level, which predated Stalin and Lenin. Under the Tsar, there was a strong awareness of Russian civilization with Dostoevsky's and what's his name, Pushkin, the major poet of Russia, who was from African descent. And Russia has always been aware of its culture and managed to build a powerful literature and cinema industry,
Of course.
Eisenstein with Potemkin and his followers all created a local cinema industry. So there was no comparison really between Guinea and the former Soviet Union, except for the fact that the leadership of Guinea imitated or picked up the worst elements of the system, the Soviet Union, and ignored the positive sides of that system, i.e., creating a literate society, providing electricity, and modernizing the peasantry, encouraging small manufacturing at the local level, before dreaming of building one of Africa's biggest dam on the Concouret, You cannot convince investors to invest in a country which has no infrastructure and ask them to pour in billions of dollars. Who will manage them?
Yeah.
Even at the counting level, you don't have the people, the resources, the human resources.
Mm-hmm. So that's. Mm-hmm. So that's. You were saying?
That's what differentiates it. That this comparison is valid to a point.
Mm-hmm.
The mimicry that the Guinean leadership did toward the Soviet Union was really picking and choosing the worst aspect.